Yo, what up guys? I wanted to make a video talking about how to improve in Valorant for this season and in general how you can improve and get to the higher ranks like Immortal if you've been striving to improve for a long time. Now, I'm not going to tell you that getting to a higher rank is easy or it can be quick. You can be quite efficient at getting better at Valorant, but there's no shortcut. So if you want to get better, it's going to take a lot of time. Trust me, when I was first trying to hit Immortal, I played 500 hours of Valorant before I first hit Immortal, something around that, as well as a few hundred hours in aim training. And that was prior to even learning about how to improve past Immortal and trying to get to Immortal 3 and higher. And that is what I'm going to talk about too. There's a lot of nuance to improving at Valorant outside of just mechanics, but maybe it was because back in the day Valorant was a bit easier to climb, but nowadays I feel like people know a lot more about how the game should be played, and especially with people like Wahujin or other Valorant content creators, coaches and all that who talk about the game at a macro level and talk about how to improve. The game has gotten more sophisticated, and I think you have to kind of change how you think about Valorant if you want to improve nowadays. So I want to break this down for you. And that is going to be starting with the elephant in the room, which is practicing your mechanics. And I've made videos on this before, but to keep it short for you, the best way I found is to both aim train and to spam DM. Those are going to be the best ways in my opinion, especially if you want to be efficient and improve rapidly more than just playing ranked for 10,000 hours and eventually being as good as a pro. I think there's a lot more efficient ways to actually improve. And so yeah, aim training and death matches are going to be really strong. And in the description, I'm going to have links to different playlists that I find helpful, but I'm going to emphasize that my main Kovacs Valorant playlist is probably my favorite because I spent a lot of time making it and I found a ton. If you look at my playlist, it's going to be massive and it's in no particular order, but I guarantee you that if you have an issue with your aim, you're going to find scenarios in my playlist that'll help you work on it. So if you want to improve your raw mechanics, like your aim and your ability to put your crosshair on a target that you want, then yeah, you should be practicing your mechanics in Kovacs or aim trainers in general. I think the Voltaic benchmarks or the Voltaic Discord made an aim labs routine that you can also try as well. And now we can talk about how long you should be practicing and how you should invest your time in different training regimes. So for example, I spend around 30 minutes in Kovacs and then I could go into DM and do like 5 DMs. If I'm really trying to improve my mechanics, there were days where I would practice my aim for 2 hours in Kovacs and then jump straight into Valorant. However, I will say that doing death matches to improve your mechanics in the game is extremely important. Just like I think aim training is extremely important. And I think you have to understand why, and that is aim training is basically the most efficient way for you to get better at putting your crosshair on the target or on when you're trying to track, when you're trying to flick, etc. And it's really efficient for improving your aim as quick as possible. But as you've probably heard before, Valorant is a lot more than just putting your crosshair on the enemy. If you're not good at moving and shooting or strafing shooting, you're probably going to get one-tapped in Valorant. If you don't know how to peek properly, you're going to get one-tapped in Valorant. If you're not going to know how to position yourself at off angles and peeking at weird times, controlling your recoil, things of all that nature, then you are going to struggle in Valorant no matter how good you are at putting your crosshair on a target. And for that reason, I think that if you have a limited time, say you have an hour and a half per day to practice your mechanics, you could do a 30 minutes in an aim trainer, an hour in deathmatch, maybe 45 minute split down the middle where you do half your time is in an aim trainer and half your time is in deathmatch. But while I do think aim training will improve your mechanics extremely fast, you cannot, and I repeat, you cannot neglect practicing your mechanics in deathmatch. And that was kind of a break point for me, was that I prioritized aim training way too much and I didn't do enough DM. And it wasn't until I started spamming DM like 5 to 10 every day that I was really able to reach my full potential in Valorant, because I could seamlessly strafe and shoot and practice, do my recoil properly and all that stuff in an actual game because I warmed up in death matches beforehand. Okay, now we could talk about another important aspect, of improving at Valorant, and that is actually learning how to play your favorite agents on every given map, and that is by watching pros. And I can't emphasize enough how important and how good you can get just by learning how to use your utility properly on different maps with your favorite agents. For example, I'm an initiator player, and I watch a lot of pros play things like Fade, Sova, and Gecko. And with initiator characters, you really have to understand your role on the team and how to use your utility to properly climb in Valorant. And as you can imagine, I'm sure a lot of you know about Sova and him being a very lineup dependent character if you want to play him at his max potential. But once you actually study and learn some of the lineups, you don't even have to learn every freaking lineup for every map, but just having a good playbook and understanding how you should play the game if they're rushing A, if they're rushing B, or if they're defaulting, and all these different scenarios. By watching pros, you really understand how to play your agent at a proper level, and that way you can really let your mechanics shine. And for example, my favorite thing is playing Sova on Breeze, for example, just learning a couple shock dart lineups so that if they're planning on A, for example, I can shock dart the planter twice and probably kill him, or at least do a good amount of chip damage before ever even entering a gunfight. And then once I actually enter a gunfight, if I don't hit the head, well, if I tag the people in the body a couple times that I shock darted, well, now I get a free kill. So I think it is extremely important to study your agent and properly understand how to play them, and don't just wing your gameplay. And I think a lot of people in Valorant do that. They have an idea of how to play their character, and they have a couple ideas for maybe a couple lineups or a couple interesting utility positions, but they don't properly understand how to play their character. So if you want to take your gameplay to the next level, the next step is studying pros. And if you're not going to do that, then you're never going to reach your full potential. And then the third thing I want to talk about, and it kind of leans on rule number 2, is you have to understand what your role on the team is, or the character that you play, and where you should be and how you should be playing on every single map, because every single map is completely different, as you can imagine. So for example, I talked about playing Fade on every map that I like, which is Sunset, and Lotus, and I can play her on Bind and Ascent. And on these maps, the role I play is a little bit different, even though in general, initiators are going to be the one to quickly flank to help their team on any given site when they're defending. On a map like Ascent, you can actually play a pseudo anchor role where you can play B and kind of play her like Sova, where you play with an Odin and you can control B main with your high pen weapon and then use your dart to wallbang people. So for example, if I didn't know how to play Fade, I might play her mid. I also like playing her mid on Ascent as well, but you have to learn how to play your character, and sometimes your role will change on a given map, like I talked about on Ascent. While normally you'd like to quickly rotate to help your team hold a site, sometimes you can play the anchor like on Ascent B. So yeah, and a couple more examples for you people who play different roles. If you're a duelist, in general, you have two different types of duelist. If you play a more mobile duelist, kind of like Jett or Raze, you're kind of the entry where your dash or your satchels allow you to cover a lot of distance to either capitalize on util from your initiator or other duelist, or you can create a distraction by satcheling or dashing onto a site and pulling the crosshair away from the choke point so that your team can push through, and then they can trade you, or you just open up the map a ton. So yeah, you have to learn your character or your role and what your job is on any given map. So if you want to learn that, a lot of the ways you can do that is by doing step number 2, which is studying pros and really taking a look at how they play with their team. Are they in the front? Are they in the back? Are they in the middle? Are they early rotating? Are they anchoring? How are they using their utility, etc., etc. And now we can talk about rule number 4, which is learning to be aggressive no matter the role. And contrary to popular belief, you can play every role quite aggressively if you know how to. So for example, if you've ever watched Nats play Sentinel, when he plays Cypher, for example, he can entry for his team. Like if you watch him play Fracture, for example, that was a map that I played Cypher a ton on. He will entry onto site with his cages, kind of like a jet smoke, but they last a lot longer. And if any of the enemies run into him, your entire team will know about it. So he's actually quite good at entering with his team. And you wouldn't really understand that if you just understand the sentinel role, like, oh, they're the lurker, they're the flank watcher, they're not meant to entry. But you can with a character like Cypher if you just know how to play in your cages on every given map. On the other side of the spectrum, a sentinel can also be a flanker. So on a map like Breeze, when you're defaulting, or if you're running a 4-1 split, where basically 4 of your teammates are rushing a site, and then you have Cypher lurk around the map and try to find an opening, and then he can get a pick and your team can rotate. So he kind of opens up a flank option or a rotate option by simply being a nuisance to the enemy team and trying to poke and prod and see if they've left a gap in their defense, and he can lurk up in the back line and get free kills. These are all different ideas of how a Cypher can get aggressive for the team. And this idea is similar for any type of agent. If you're a controller player, you can kind of fill that lurk role as well, like Viper on Icebox, for example, is a great lurking agent because of how her smokes can help her bypass a turret or get into tube. Now, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, if you're like a lower rank and you don't know how Viper should be played, don't worry about it too much. Go study pros if you're a Viper player. But in general, you don't have to be a defensive or overly defensive and scared on any role. You can look to get aggressive. And I think a very cool person to watch is actually Curry, because he played a lot of Deadlock, and I believe Dopey made a video on it where basically he played a Sentinel, but if you watch him play Deadlock, he plays there extremely aggressive. And you can do that no matter the role. Of course, if you're struggling in your rank mechanically and you can't take raw aim duels, I actually think that it can be quite hard to play Sentinel and Controller quite effectively because you don't have the backup utility that an Initiator or a Duelist might have. You can still learn to be aggressive and get better at the game. So yeah, if you want to get better, learn to be aggressive no matter the role. And the final step I think I should talk about is learning to strategize and communicate with your team. And this one is kind of a complex idea because it kind of goes into every other step I just talked about, because you really have to understand your role, your character, and the characters that your teammates are playing, and also the characters that the enemy teams are playing, to really be able to strategize effectively. So let me build up a scenario for you. If you're playing Sunset, for example, and the enemy team is playing Breach, Omen, and Phoenix, for example, that is a loud comp, but I've seen that comp in solo queue as well. Well, that's a big red flag for me, because whenever you see a Breach or an Omen, they can lock down a main with their stun or their blind. So if I'm trying to strategize with my team an A hit, then I might say that we should contact up and not make any noise to prevent the Breach from stunning and hitting us, or we can alternatively make a lot of noise but not fully aggress up a main to bait out the Omen blind, bait out the Breach stun. That way we don't get crunched from all this util dumping a main and then die. So that is an example of a situation where I understand the strength of Breach and Omen on Sunset, and I can play around it by baiting, lurking, or doing any other idea that you can learn from pros, or from even watching pro play. You can learn how people play around certain util dumping areas on a map. And there's many different other concepts that you can learn, but I think it can be quite important for you, if you don't understand the strategy of Valorant, to watch coaches or pros talk about it, especially Woohoojin. I know Woohoojin will talk about the idea or mini games, I think he called it, for different maps, where you can understand the strategy and how you should be playing every given map. So yeah, these are going to be my 5 steps for you to improve at Valorant, and hopefully you can learn something here. And I know it's kind of basic ideas, but these are going to be the 5 rules that I've used to climb to Immortal 3 and that you can use too. And like I said at the beginning of the video, you cannot hit a high rank immediately. It will take time. It will take time for you to study your agent, to study pros, to learn how to be aggressive, to practice your mechanics, which I can't emphasize enough that practicing your mechanics will take you a long time. For example, I'm still like Immortal 3, Immortal 2 range, and I have like 1,800 hours on aim trainers, which a lot of it obviously wasn't targeted to improving my aim in a game like Valorant, but even still, I have a lot of time in aim trainers and around 1,000 hours in comp in Valorant, and I'm still in that Immortal 2, Immortal 3 range. So yeah, if you want to improve, you're really gonna have to dedicate a lot of time. And don't be feeling scared about what I said about how much time it took me to reach this rank, because you can hit Immortal with a lot less hours. I think Immortal to Radiant is where the grind becomes really, really hard. But if your goal is just to climb up to Immortal, don't be too daunted. A lot of the people that you play with in your lower ranks are going to be not doing any of what I said in this video, and it'll be really easy for you to outgrow them. So if you want to improve, if you want to hit Immortal, then follow these 5 steps and actually practice everything I talked about, and you will surely improve the game. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching.